right, so today's topic is commercial paper or negotiable instruments. This is part of Articles 3 and 4 of the Uniform Commercial Code. In law school, it's a 3-hour course. We're going to simplify things and try to finish this up in an hour, perhaps, or less. So I've taken commercial paper, aka negotiable instruments, and created a 2-part lecture. Step 1, we're going to determine whether something actually is a negotiable instrument. So what are the requisite attributes to become a negotiable instrument? And the answer is important, because the holder of a negotiable instrument may actually have more rights under that instrument than the transferor. The next slide is an example. I call that my so what example. But before we get there, let me tell you what step 2 is. So step 1, do we have a negotiable instrument? Step 2, how do we transfer it? Or in other words, how do you negotiate that instrument? And negotiate is simply the legal term for transfer. All right, so let's get to the so what slide. Here it is. There are 2 examples. On the left column first, Al enters into a written contract to sell a car to Bob. Bob promises to pay Al $500 in 2 weeks, and this is a contract. So Al lied to Bob. The car's mileage is 150,000, not 15,000. So in other words, Al has created a situation where he has committed fraud. Okay, so Al assigns his rights in this contract to Charlie. Now, Bob finds out that Al has lied to him. He's committed fraud. Can Charlie enforce the contract with Bob? Well, Charlie is an assignee of the contract right. And so as an assignee, Charlie stands in the shoes of his transferor, that is Al, the assignor. So can Charlie enforce the contract with Bob? And the answer is no. He's not going to be able to recover from Bob. How about this? Same example, only this time Bob gives Al a check, and we're going to find out in a minute that a check is a type of a negotiable instrument. Now, Al transfers the check to Charlie through proper negotiation. Now, can Charlie collect on the $5,000 check? And the answer is yes, because the check is a negotiable instrument. All right, so let's find out what makes it a negotiable instrument. Before we do, I need to show you that there are 2 types of negotiable instruments. Drafts, and a check is a type of a draft, and notes, and a certificate of deposit is a type of a note. All right, so a draft is simply a 3-party instrument that's payable at a specified time. Well, a check is a type of a draft. A check is a little bit different because it's always drawn on a bank. And a check, unlike a draft, is payable on demand. In other words, as soon as it is presented for payment. So on this slide, you will see an example of a draft because it's drawn on the ABC Corporation, not a bank. A note is a 2-party instrument. It contains a promise to pay a sum certain in money. And so this note is June 1st, 2019. I promise to pay the order of M. Flanagan $1,000 plus 5% interest on June 1st, 2020, signed Claire LaRoche. A certificate of deposit is considered to be a type of a note. And so if you think about this, it makes sense. So let's say I had some extra cash, which, by the way, I don't. And I don't want it sitting in my checking account. What I could do is I could loan my money to the bank, and the bank then would pay me back at a set time in the future with interest. So I'd get back my principal with interest. This is the notion behind a certificate of deposit, or a CD. So now let's look at the requirements of negotiability. To be a negotiable instrument, you must have a writing in some permanent movable form. All right, this is based on a true story. Could you write a check on the back of a shirt? I don't recommend that you do that, but could you? The answer is, yeah, you could. It's a writing in some permanent movable form. Decades ago, a disgruntled taxpayer who thought he was paying way too much in taxes decided that he was going to give the IRS the shirt off his back. And so he wrote a check for the tax bill on the back of a shirt, folded it up, sent it in with his tax return. Could the IRS cash it? And the answer is yes. Do I recommend that you do that? No, never, because you certainly wouldn't want to raise a red flag with the IRS. So you have to have a writing in some permanent movable form. Could I write a promissory note on a boulder? No, it's not movable. Could I write a check on a watermelon? No, it's not permanent. So permanent movable form. It has to be signed by the appropriate party. So you have to have the signature of the maker of a promissory note or the signature of the drawer of a draft. Seems obvious. How about this? Could you adopt X as your signature? Again, yes, you could, but I don't recommend doing that. So you have to have a writing in some permanent movable form that's signed by the appropriate party. And if it's a promissory note, it must contain an unconditional promise, or if it's a draft, it must contain an unconditional order. Are these unconditional? Is this an unconditional promise? I promise to pay Bob $2,000 for the big screen TV, provided it works for the next 12 months. Is this an unconditional promise? And the answer, of course, is no. A writing in some permanent movable form signed by the appropriate party containing an unconditional promise or an unconditional order to pay a sum certain in money. And money means currency. Cash means cash. All right, so is payment in foreign currency acceptable? Yes. That's cash. How about payment in U.S. savings bonds? No, that's not cash. How about payment in gold bullion? No, that's not cash. Sometimes you'll see an instrument has a discrepancy. So what if the amount payable in numbers is different from the amount payable in words? Is the check still good? And the answer is yes. And let's look at one more. What if the payee's name is misspelled on a check? Is the check still negotiable? And the answer is yes. So how much is the check good for in this example? Pay Claire LaRoche $220. And it says 200 in numerals and 220 in words. Well, with the negotiable instrument, the words govern over the numerals. So the check in this example is good for $220. Would it matter if my name is misspelled? No, it's still a negotiable instrument. Payable on demand or payable at a definite time. Is this payable at a definite time? I promise to pay to the order of Benny Bean $500 2 weeks after he gets married. Is that payable at a definite time? No, we don't know if Benny will ever get married. How about this? I owe you $500. Is that payable at a definite time? No, thus not a negotiable instrument. So words of negotiability have to be on the face of the instrument for it to be considered to be a negotiable instrument. So a promissory note is going to say, I promise to pay. A draft is going to say, pay to the order of, or pay to the bearer of. There's a little exception with respect to drafts, and that is if you have a check, it's okay for a check to say pay to, and it's still going to be considered to be negotiable. All right, so before we go any further and we talk about how do you transfer a negotiable instrument, we need to talk about whether a piece of paper is order paper or bearer paper. Order paper is payable to a specific person, and bearer paper is either going to be payable to cash or to bearer, or it can be created if there's an endorsement and the endorsement is an endorsement in blank. In other words, the endorser only signs his or her name. All right, so let's look at this endorsement. Pay to the order of Jane Doe, signed John Doe. So this is not an endorsement in blank. This would create order paper. What if you ignored, though, the pay to the order of Jane Doe and there was just a signature here, it said John Doe, then that would be bearer paper. It's a signature in blank. All right, so proper negotiation. With order paper, that's paper that's payable to a specific person, you must have delivery plus endorsement to create a situation where the next person is the holder of that instrument, where there's been proper transfer. The legal term for transfer is negotiation. With bearer paper, mere delivery is enough. No additional signatures are necessary. Bearer paper is essentially a substitute for cash. So let's say, here's the example. Bertha gets her paycheck every Friday and she turns it over and she immediately endorses it and she puts it in her top desk drawer. Should Bertha do this? The answer, of course, is no, because she essentially has created bearer paper and anyone could walk by, steal the check, and cash it without any further endorsements. So this happened in real life. This is based on a real example. And Bertha did do this. She left it in her top desk drawer. A thief came by and stole it, took it down to the Zippy Mart, and the names have been changed. The Zippy Mart, and cashed it without any further endorsements. So here's my hint to you. How do you know whether you have bearer paper or order paper? First, look at the back of the instrument. If there are no endorsements on the back of the instrument, then turn it over and look at its face, because an endorsement can change the nature of paper, and the last endorsement tells you what you have. Again, if there are no endorsements, look at what the face of the paper says. Here's some endorsements. The one at the top of the slide is a restrictive endorsement, and a restrictive endorsement places restrictions on the transfer of the paper. For deposit only is a restrictive endorsement. So Bertha, if she was concerned about someone forging her endorsement, what she should have done is she should have used a restrictive endorsement. For deposit only, Bertha. Now, if you have a restrictive endorsement, then the next holder of that paper has to follow the restriction. So the thief would not have been able to take her check down to the Zippy Mart and cash it. A special endorsement is one where it's payable to a second person, and that creates order paper. So this example, paid to the order of Jane Doe, signed John Doe, that's a special endorsement. And this is one way to create order paper. A qualified endorsement is one that you would rarely ever use. And this is an example of a qualified endorsement is without recourse. With a qualified endorsement, it would destroy any sort of contractual liability. I bet you didn't know this. But why does the bank want you to endorse an instrument? Well, as an endorser, you are secondarily liable on the instrument. And actually, you are liable in the order in which you endorse, so that if for some reason the instrument is dishonored, you could have liability. If you want to destroy the possibility that you would have secondary liability, you would use a qualified endorsement or without recourse. And then an endorsement in blank is simply where you sign your name, and this would create bearer paper. And anyone can cash bearer paper. Just pick it up and deliver it to the next person. All right, so we're not going to let just anyone have these special rights by holding a negotiable instrument. You must be a holder in due course. Now, a holder in due course, after you've determined that you have a negotiable instrument and that negotiable instrument has been properly transferred or negotiated, you need to determine whether the holder is given the rights of a holder in due course. A holder in due course is simply a good faith purchaser, that is, they've given value of a negotiable instrument, who takes it without notice of any defense on the instrument. So what could the defenses be? Was the check dishonored? Is it overdue? Is it a stale check? Is there an underlying obligation based on a breach of contract? Or is this a fraudulent transaction? Oh, if any of those exist, then you can't be a holder in due course if you know about them. If you have somebody who qualifies as a holder in due course, that holder in due course takes the negotiable instrument free from most defenses. So here's your example. A holder in due course takes a negotiable instrument free from most offenses, as I said earlier. The holder in due course must give value for the negotiable instrument and take it without notice of any defense. Okay, so Al gives Bob a $1,000 note to pay for a flat screen TV. Bob then sells the note to Charlie at a discount for $850. Let's say Bob doesn't want to wait for his money, he wants it now, so he sells it at a discount. Bob never delivers the TV to Al. What has just happened? There's been a breach of contract, right? So can Charlie get payment from Al? And the answer is yes, Charlie can, because Charlie is a holder in due course. He gave value for the note without notice that there was any defense on it. All right, let's change up the example just a little bit. So what if Bob gives the note to Charlie? Charlie doesn't pay for it, Bob gives it to him. Can Charlie be a holder in due course? No, he didn't give value. What if Bob tells Charlie about his plan to rip off Al before he sells the note to Charlie? Now can Charlie be a holder in due course? Absolutely not, because he didn't take the note without notice of a defense on it. Some things about banks and customer relationships. One thing, post-dated check. So in general, the bank has no liability for paying a post-dated check before the date on the instrument. So what's a post-dated check? So let's say you don't have any money right now, but on the first of the month you will have money. So you give someone a check for an obligation that you owe, and you date it as of the first of the month. Now, can that person take it down to the bank right now and cash the check? Yes, absolutely yes. You could have some overdraft fees and some other problems if the holder of the check does that. Now, under what circumstances would the bank be liable for paying an instrument before the date on the instrument? Because a check is a demand instrument. To be able to hold the bank liable, the customer must have a genuine loss. In addition, you must notify the bank that you have given someone a post-dated check. Here's an example. A couple decades ago now, I bought a horse trailer. So it was a time when my children were little, and I'd driven my husband's truck down to Halifax County, and I was going to buy a horse trailer from someone who had just started a business rehabbing horse trailers. All right, so I pick out the horse trailer. I said, this is the one I want. I want to take it back with me. And the owner of the business said, well, there's a problem. I don't have the title to this horse trailer yet. Is there anything I can do to protect myself? So here's what I did. I said, how long will it take you to get the title? She said, a week. I said, all right, I'm going to give you a post-dated check for the full amount of the trailer. I feel certain that you will give me the title. I then called my bank, and I said, bank, I've just given someone a post-dated check, and I explained the situation. And I said, please do not pay it before the date on the check, because I may not get title to the horse trailer. Now, everything worked out just fine, so there was no problem. But let's say the bank goes ahead and cashes the check right now, and I never get title to the horse trailer. Now I have a genuine loss. So now is the bank liable to me? And the answer is yes. Now, a check is presumed to be stale after 6 months. Here's the law. It says that a bank may honor a stale check, but they are not required to honor a stale check. So how would that work? When my kids were little, grandparents would send checks for their birthday. And 6, 7 months later, I would be cleaning up their bedroom, and I would find a birthday card with a check in it. I would take those checks down to the bank. The bank always honored the checks. Were they required to? No, but they may. They did honor them, but they're not required to. Stop payment orders. What if you lose an instrument and you want to make sure someone doesn't cash it? Let's say it's you have endorsed it in blank, or maybe made out a check to cash. You could issue a stop payment order, or have the bank issue a stop payment order. So what do you need to remember? Well, an oral stop payment order is only good for 14 days. A written stop payment order is good for 6 months. All right, and so if you do not want someone to be able to stop payment on an instrument they gave you, you may never stop payment on a certified check, not ever. So what's the extent of your liability if your debit card is lost or if your debit card is stolen? So here are the rules, but since most of you use debit cards now. If you notify the bank within 2 days of that you discover that you've lost your debit card, then the extent of your liability is $50. That's a maximum you can be liable for. If you notify the bank 2 days later, but before 60 days after the unauthorized use appears on your bank statement, then your maximum liability is $500. So you would want to keep an eye on your transactions. Otherwise, the $500 limitation does not apply. Last slide of the day. Assume that someone comes in your dorm room and they steal a blank check and they forge your signature. The bank cashes the check and your account is drained. Who is liable for the money withdrawn from your account? This actually is based on a true story. This was a student at Longwood about 10 years ago. All right, so the bank cashed a check that was drawn on his account. He was not the person who had written the check. So who is liable? And the answer is this is a forged signature. The bank is supposed to know your signature as a customer, and so the bank is liable. And in this case, the bank had to return all the money to the student's account. So that's it. What I do have here is I have a few, a mini problem set for you. So we're going to go over this very quickly. So look at this instrument. Is this check order paper or bearer paper? You should be able to tell me whether it is order paper or bearer paper. This actually is, you look at the endorsement. It does have one endorsement, paid to Julia LaRoche, signed Rip LaRoche. It's payable to a specific person, so it is order paper. All right, so what type of endorsement is this? This is a special endorsement. It's endorsed to a specific person. So what must Julia do in order to negotiate or transfer this check to someone else? She must endorse it and deliver it. What if the payee's name is misspelled? In this example, the payee's name is misspelled. Is the check still negotiable? And the answer is yes, it's still negotiable. So how would you endorse the signature if your name is misspelled? Well, really, there's no wrong answer. The proper spelling, the improper spelling, or both. And so next question is, what type of endorsement is this? For deposit only. This is a restrictive endorsement. All right, is this order paper or bearer paper? Well, there are no endorsements on the back. You look at the front of the instrument and it's payable to cash. This is bearer paper. How do you negotiate this check to another person? Mere delivery is all it takes. All right, so here there's a discrepancy. To begin with, is this order paper or bearer paper? So you have one endorsement. It's an endorsement in blank, and someone just signed their name, so it is bearer paper. So is this a good check? There's a discrepancy between the amount written out in words and the amount written out in numerals. Yes, it's a good check. And so how much is it good for? It's good for the amount written out in words. And so this makes sense when you think about it, because you have to think more when you're writing out the words versus writing out the numerals. Additionally, it would be easier if I were an unscrupulous person and I wanted to alter this check. It would be easier for me to alter the numerals. It would be more difficult for me to alter the words. So words govern over numerals. So how much is it good for again? It's good for $120. All right, so that's it for commercial paper negotiable instruments. Thank you.